Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining us on today's webinar, Developing Great Leaders During Times of Uncertainty. Our presenters today are Dr. Elizabeth Pavese, Senior Behavioral Scientist at CoachHub. Liz is a Senior Behavioral Scientist at CoachHub, where she marries her expertise in organizational psychology, employee experience, and organizational development to close the gap between coaching research and practice. And Claude Werder, SVP and Principal Analyst at Brandon Hall Group. I would like to extend a thank you to CoachHub for sponsoring today's webinar. CoachHub is the leading global talent development platform that enables organizations to create a personalized, measurable, and scalable coaching program for the entire workforce, regardless of department and seniority level. By doing so, organizations are able to reap a multitude of benefits, including increased employee engagement, higher levels of productivity, improved job performance, and increased retention. CoachHub's global pool of coaches is comprised of over 3,000 certified business coaches in 70 countries across 6 continents, with coaching sessions available in over 60 languages to serve more than 500 clients. Now, for those of you that aren't familiar with Brandon Hall Group, we are a research and analyst firm that empowers excellence in organizations around the world through our research and tools. A quick mention that our certification programs are open. And for more information on those, please visit our main website, www.brandonhall.com. Your participation in our surveys is one of the most crucial components of our research. So if you see any surveys on our schedule that you would like to participate in, it's always greatly appreciated. All participants do receive a piece of complimentary research once the results have been analyzed. And again, you can visit our website for the latest. A few logistics. This presentation is being recorded. The recording and the slides will be provided to everyone within 24 hours of the webinar in a follow-up email. If you would like to ask a question for our presenters, please do so by typing it into the question box on your control panel. And finally, if you would like to download an instant copy of today's presentation, you may do so by finding it in the handout section also on your control panel. And without further delay, I will turn it over to Claude so we can dive right in.
Well, thanks, Melissa, and thanks for everyone that's joining us today, and thanks, of course, to CoachHub for sponsoring. We're excited about what we're going to talk about today, focusing in on leadership development in uncertain times. And we'll start by just outlining for you through our research kind of where this leadership development is, the state of leadership development. Then we'll move to supporting emerging leaders and talking about the new needs that leaders have. And then drill down a little bit more into bringing development to all leaders at all levels, and investing in leader development for underrepresented groups. We encourage you as we go through to ask questions as they come to you. We may handle a couple of questions during the course of the presentation, but we'll also leave time at the end for Q&A. So let's go ahead and move forward here. So leadership development has been an area of heavy investment for many years. And each year, for the last 10, 12 years, Brandon Hall Group has done research, and we ask about investment in leadership development. And each year, it goes up. And each year, we ask about the effectiveness of leadership development. It's always rated low. And each year, we ask whether leadership development is positively impacting business outcomes. And the answer is, unfortunately, no, not really. So one of the biggest reasons why leadership development has not really worked as well as it should is that, like most corporate learning, it's been event-driven. Leadership has generally been taught in a classroom, and as Liz will discuss, they often forget what they learn because they don't have a chance to apply it. There's also a lot of other issues with classroom leadership development, which we're going to talk about. Leadership development really should be a journey, a continuous learning journey. It involves behavior change, changing the way you act in certain situations as a leader. And as anyone knows who's tried to lose weight or to start a new habit or end an old habit, changing behaviors comes from reinforcement of the importance, and most importantly, by repetition or practice. And that's really been lacking in traditional leadership development. But we're now beginning to see signs of positive change. So if we move to the next slide, you'll see a list of items that leaders need to thrive based on our research. So this year, the research, which was conducted, of course, during the pandemic, when remote work and virtual learning were really taking hold, organizations have indicated that they're really ready to shake up leadership development. I'm going to focus on the top 4 items in this slide. And at the top of the list of things that leaders need to thrive, according to our research, are coaching and networking with peers, which we're going to be talking an awful lot about today because it's at the top of the list. Next is transformational leadership and change management. This is seen as more important than in past years, obviously, because we've been operating in a VUCA environment, right? Volatile, uncertain, complex, and ambiguous. And that is unlikely to change anytime soon. So change management and transformation, which used to rate pretty low on our priority list in our research, is now toward the top. It's now seen as critical. Organizations are also realizing that practice makes perfect. In other words, that teaching leaders new skills and behaviors require that practice that I talked about, and ideally in a safe environment using realistic scenarios. Organizations are also beginning to invest more in putting leaders in unfamiliar situations that they might face in their next job rather than in their current job. What better way to assess leader potential than seeing leaders in a new situation and see how they react and adapt? And then team leadership has also moved way up the priority list. And that's because our other research that we do indicates that 77% of organizations believe that at least half the work that they do is now done through teams. And 70% also say that work done in teams will increase substantially in the next few years. So having leaders who can thrive and lead in high-performing teams is important. And that also requires that leadership development becomes more democratized, meaning development of leaders at all levels, because team leadership can be at any level of an organization, depending on the type of team. The common denominator across all the different types of leader training, though, is the need for better foundational skills. Sometimes in the past, these have been called soft skills, but now they're really becoming critical skills. And 8 in 10 organizations say that's important. So what does that mean? Those foundational or critical skills include things like self-awareness, authenticity, empathy, collaboration, accountability, inclusive communication, communicating to everyone, adaptability, and of course, emotional and cultural intelligence. But there are challenges involved in making these changes. So in leadership development, which Liz will share. Liz?
Thanks, Claude. Yeah, you already touched on some of these. And so despite the, kind of refocus on some of these foundational skills that are required for leadership today and navigating the world that we're in, many of our approaches to learning and development have not kept at pace with how quickly our world is changing around us. And so what we end up seeing is that the learning that we're really investing in is just not sticking. And it's for a few different reasons. One, we're learning for the wrong reasons. You talked about most learning in the past has been very event-driven. It's not meaningful to the learner and often not necessarily tied back to the organizational priorities and strategies. Second, we're learning the wrong things at the wrong time. You also mentioned, Claude, that this more sort of personalized and democratized way of learning is really needed now, especially if we're going to apply our learning in real time as we're experiencing the world. And third, we forget what we learn, right? It's just a part of our cognition and the way that our brain operates. But we tend to learn, what we tend to learn tends to kind of go right out the door within a matter of, even 24 to 48 hours of when we're learning the information. And so it's really important that we start to really kind of keep at pace with the way that the world is evolving and really change our approaches to learning and leadership development. We need to think about how we can build our maturity in our practices, as well as really be able to place learning in the context of what our leaders are experiencing every day. So let's take a look at how we can start to maybe rethink the way that we're approaching leadership development and building our maturity organizationally to really get there.
So we've actually developed at Brandon Howell Group a leadership development maturity model, and this is it. What you're seeing. There's a lot to read here, and you can digest it maybe a little bit more when you look at the slide deck after the session. But the bottom line is that organizations at the bottom half of the model, which is about 60% of employers, are really just getting started with this more effective leadership development strategy that Liz and I have talked about. And they're not really producing leaders yet that can drive business results. Employers at level 3, in the second to the top rung, that amounts to about 1/3 of organizations. They're beginning to introduce leadership development as a continuous learning journey, where the leadership development strategy is developed and it's aligned more closely with the business objectives. These companies are now beginning to see business impact from leadership development. And where we all want to be, but only 10% are right now, is at level 4, where leadership development drives business performance, where continuous learning is a way of life, where there's spaced learning experiences, supplemented coaching and mentoring of leaders, action learning projects, opportunities to practice skills in a safe environment. There's all these different things going on that lead to this continuous development. So we want to talk more about this leadership development and how you can have a greater impact, and we're going to drill down on that. But first, we want to hear from you, ask you a quick poll question to see where you're at, and that helps us adjust as we go in the presentation to make sure we're talking at the right things to help you. So the question is pretty simple. What are you doing to improve your approach to leadership development? Are you A, focusing on foundational leadership skills, coaching and mentoring? B, C, scenario-based training? D, all of the above and maybe some other things as well? In other words, you're using a lot of different methods. Or E, you really haven't started any of this yet. None of the above. So we're interested in seeing what everybody's doing.
We'll give everyone just a couple more seconds here to answer, make sure we get a good sample size. All right, and I will go ahead and close the poll and share those results.
Yeah, so this is really good news. We've got a group here that is pretty far along. About 60%, 57% are using all the methods we talked about so far. Less than 10% are really not getting started. So you're on your way, and that's great. And hopefully we can give you some more tips to move forward. And then some organizations, 22% are only doing the foundational skills, and that's a good place to start. And then moving into some of these other things can lead you into even more progress. So let's move on to the next slide now and drill down a little bit more. Here's some data around the points I made earlier on improving leadership development. This is what most organizations believe can improve leadership development according to our research. So as mentioned earlier, increasing coaching and mentoring of leaders ranks number 1. This is the most personalized approach. Next is increased collaboration between leader peers to share experiences. And I'll talk a little bit more about that later too. And third is applying learning to real world scenarios. So putting people in real life situations, but practicing skills in a safe environment. Drilling a little deeper on the next slide, we also ask organizations to get a little bit more specific in what types of training are important. 85% said it's important to focus on practical skills that leaders will need in future roles, as I mentioned. That means at each leader level, don't focus on the current job as much as on future roles. This improves leader readiness. because the challenges organizations face is not just improving skills now, but getting them ready for the next roles as the business continues to change and roles change. And of course, there's talent retention issues that organizations are dealing with now. So there's going to be constant change. So seeing leaders practice their future roles provides some really good insight on how ready they are to move when needed. And then also what you need to do to maybe close some gaps to help them prepare in that continuous learning journey that we're talking about. 82% also believe that there needs to be a better transition of leaders to new roles. This is something that organizations have always struggled with, is if you move up or change jobs within an organization, whether you're in a leadership role or not, it's often a quick change with very little preparation, very little transition. And I talk to organizations all the time that really don't want to give people transition. They just want to move them into the new roles so they can start working. So in many organizations, there are no real transitional programs for leaders beyond orientation of maybe a few days. And 1/3 of organizations offer no onboarding for leaders moving into new roles. That's a big problem, especially if you haven't already seen them in future situations through your training programs. And 75% of organizations believe that leaders would benefit from more peer-to-peer working sessions where they can learn from each other by sharing experiences and talking about how they've resolved various situations. Now, this is a little different working session than just enabling collaboration between training sessions and having like chat groups where leaders can collaborate and trade ideas. These are putting peers together, often using a specific scenario to see how they can collaborate and work together to solve challenges. This also builds relationships and again, provides some insight on how this group of leaders might work together in the future. So all of these areas are more personalized forms of learning than traditional leader training. Liz, over to you.
Absolutely. And so just to kind of drive this home a little bit more, what we can see here, and the first figure comes from McKinsey, where it's showing that only 15% of leaders are really reporting an increase of performance through formal classroom training. So it just furthers that point further around how we can start to really shift and maybe invest in much more personalized approaches to leadership development. And one of the things in a study that came out from the Human Capital Institute in partnership with the International Coaching Federation, I believe it was in 2018, found that coaching activities are 2 times more effective than any other change management activity in your arsenal. So if we go back to some of that context around learning in the context of today, coaching can have a really tremendous impact. And that's definitely something that we're seeing, as we look at our data and the customers that are leveraging some digital coaching within in the partnerships that we have. So what you can see here is that, looking at our latest data trends, 88% of leaders are reporting increases in goal attainment, and leaders are also reporting improved productivity and collaboration as a result of their focus on coaching to really help them strengthen some of the core capabilities and foundational skills that Claude talked about earlier. So coaching really is one of those tools that can be incredibly powerful. But let's maybe take a pause for a second and really define what we mean by coaching and then also digital coaching. So let's kind of go on to the next slide and clarify this terminology before we get even deeper into the conversation today. Coaching, and this is according to the International Coaching Federation, which is sort of the governing or credentialing body for accredited coaching, is a partnership between a coach and a client that's thought-provoking. And it's a creative process that inspires people to maximize their potential, both personally and professionally. If we click again and take a look at digital coaching though, what does that mean? What does it mean to do coaching in a virtual or digital environment? We're not talking about, a bot or, an artificial intelligence. What we're talking about is that it's taking that sort of traditional face-to-face modality in that thought-provoking and creative process and delivering it through a platform. It's a non-hierarchical developmental partnership where the people are separated geographically, where learning and reflection is conducted both digitally, virtually on video, as well as can happen in a more asynchronous manner through messaging. So it's pretty incredible what we can do when we think about the power of taking coaching, which used to happen sort of one-on-one, and how if powered through technology and where we are today, can really start to bring more personal development and truly democratize that approach to learning to more people at scale. So let's turn now to our next poll and kind of gauge a little bit more about what's going on in your organizations.
Yeah, so we just want to get a sense before we move forward on how you're coaching leaders now. We're not talking about coaching, performance manager to employee. We're talking about coaching leaders to become better leaders. So are you doing it early in a leader's career? Are you doing it more for diversity and inclusion initiatives? Are you doing it to drive internal mobility? Are you using all of those things and maybe more? Or are you not there yet in terms of coaching leaders? You're not really working at it yet. So the results are flying in here.
All right, and we'll give everyone just a few more seconds here.
Yep. So always interesting to see what people are doing. And also, it's great if you if you want to share some maybe the challenges you had to coaching in our questions, that we can maybe address that as well. So 44% are making multiple uses of coaching, either using the three things above, early career development, D&I, and internal mobility, and maybe other things as well. And then 19%, so 1 in 5 of you are not doing anything at all yet related to coaching. Somebody mentioned we missed performance coaching. We're really looking at leader coaching here, which could involve some performance issues, but it's more about developing new leader skills, evolving their thinking. So this is, I think, fairly typical of what we found. Is a lot of organizations, about half, maybe a little less than half, are doing a variety of different types of leading coaching, but quite a few companies are still looking to get started. So hopefully we can give you some ideas on how to move forward. So we want to start drilling down now, showing you how several organizations have used coaching to improve leadership development. Coaching is really important, as we've mentioned, but there needs to be a sort of a coaching ecosystem to be successful. So on the next slide, we've got a little bit of data, and then we're going to move into some stories. So unfortunately, at this point, only about a fifth of organizations to about a third are linking coaching, and we're talking about leader coaching now, to their talent strategy. So that means there really isn't as much of an ecosystem, an infrastructure to drive coaching as we would like to see to make it as effective as it can be. So for example, most organizations are doing a good job at communicating business goals to employees, but far fewer, just a little bit more than a third, are communicating the importance of coaching to achieve those business goals, which, if you did that, could create a greater sense of urgency and purpose of adopting coaching. Without that link to the talent strategy, coaching is a goal that just often isn't realized. And we're beginning to see over the course of this year that more organizations are beginning to think about using external coaches and digital coaching platforms to improve the breadth and quality of coaching. But right now, less than 30% have a budget to do that. So extending coaching and thinking about it differently, not just internal coaching, but external coaching and digital coaching platforms, helps to scale it. And a lot of organizations struggle with having enough coaches within the organization who either qualify or have time. And so expanding the ecosystem and not relying at least completely on internal coaching can really be helpful. And so Liz is now going to go through, she has several great examples of how digital coaching has helped with leadership development. Liz?
Yeah, absolutely. So our first sort of story here is around Fujitsu, and why we selected this in the context of really supporting emerging leaders and new leadership needs is even prior to the pandemic, Fujitsu was going through massive digital transformation to really shift their organization. And the pandemic, like many of us have experienced, has accelerated the strategies that were in place prior. And so not only did Fujitsu have a recognition of their needing to develop digital agility, cognitive agility, really develop some new skill sets and behaviors in their leaders to drive their strategic changes, they now needed to figure out a way to bring, digital transformation to the learning and development of people when their learning and development approaches no longer fit to the context that they found themselves in the pandemic. And so as a learning organization, and I think an organization that is pretty agile, being sort of a tech and information tech company themselves, they moved very quickly to figure out how to change their portfolio of learning programs to be online. And part of that solution was to really think about how we can bring coaching to more people. They really wanted to scale up their ability to reach more individuals and help them navigate tremendous change throughout their organization and across all of the different areas that they operate in. So let's kind of take a look at what their sort of program and rollout of this learning approach looked like. So Fujitsu really was focusing on how do we digitize our learning and how do we scale development for more people as we're going through this digital transformation, as well as now navigating a much more hybrid environment that they were previously. So the first place that they started was really focusing on this program called Ready to Lead, where it was a program that focused on preparing leaders for future roles. And so historically, there was not a coaching component associated with that formal development program. And so by providing coaching wrapped around the development of new leaders and first-time leaders, it was able to put that learning into context and have that reflective space needed to maximize that learning transfer. The next place that Fujitsu wanted to go in this journey for scaling people development was to really support more employees more broadly by focusing on career mobility and internal mobility. So again, attached to more of a formal sort of process or program, Fujitsu then aligned coaching to their horizontal career mobility program. So it allowed a population of employees who historically have not ever been able to have coaching as a part of their own development really have the benefit of having the space to navigate new career transitions, figure out what it is they're looking for, what do they want, where do they want to go in their careers, how do the opportunities within Fujitsu align to their skills and their development. And it was just revolutionary for many frontline employees that typically wouldn't have had that kind of opportunity. The next sort of phase of Fujitsu's transformation kind of ties back into much more that focus on the digital transformation. So while they're preparing future leaders, really focusing on some of the foundational skill sets for navigating, becoming a leader, as well as navigating the changes that Fujitsu was experiencing, they wanted to really focus on the pocket of leaders in the organization that are really driving the digital transformation. So, and hyper focus on developing sort of the skill sets required for agility and transformation, like cognitive agility, problem solving, resilience, navigating through ambiguity. And so by focusing on product and technology organization leaders, they're really starting to drive a change in that digital transformation from the top down, enlisting leaders as part of that kind of you go first model, which really helps with the change management of learning programs, and be able to foster a new language around what does it mean to be a leader and developing certain capabilities that matter for digital change and transformation. It's a really powerful story of Fujitsu really targeting different leaders at different levels at different times, but right when they need it the most, aligned to their talent and business objectives to really drive change for them. So let's take a look at our next sort of area. Here we're going to talk about bringing development to all leaders. So here we have a case of B. Braun. It's our next customer story. So B. Braun is another one of our fantastic customers who was, again, similar to Fujitsu, going through a lot of transformation in their organization. B. Braun is medicine pharma, a lot of manufacturing is a part of their core operations. And what they were recognizing at a leadership level is that they really didn't have leaders who were agile enough to navigate the incredible changes that were happening on a daily basis. They also were recognizing that leaders didn't necessarily have the coaching skills and capabilities themselves to be able to help their teams navigate through change. And so they were hyper technically focused, hyper operationally focused, which is not uncommon, I think, for their context and not uncommon for many organizations. And so what they really wanted to do was, one, really help to develop some of those foundational skills that, like Claude was talking about earlier in the webinar, within their leaders to really develop their own managerial styles and managerial leadership capabilities, not just the technical and operational skills that they have a lot of skill in. And they wanted to start really bringing development in a different way to more employees from the ground up. So B. Braun has this principle that's called shop floor empowerment, which is really about how change comes from the people doing the work every day. And so a solution like digital coaching really aligned very well for what B. Braun was trying to do in transforming their approaches to learning and empowering more people when they need it most. So if we take a look at sort of the next slide, we'll see a little bit of a timeline of how B. Braun approached this from a scalability perspective. So in order to kind of, like any good change management, to sort of work out the kinks when you haven't, maybe taken an approach that's very broad sweeping of taking a particular learning intervention or talent development intervention and applying it to large groups of people, we started out with a pilot and worked with them to have a few cohorts of shift leaders and individual contributors across very different plant locations start to experience digital coaching in a more programmatic type of way. And this happened after a large restructuring effort so that people had the support that they needed to navigate through those changes and apply the learning and mindset shifts during that change or immediately following those changes. And then as you can see, as you just move along the timeline, there's just an increasing larger rollout to get more buy-in across different locations to really fine-tune the sort of approach in the delivery of digital coaching. We then integrated more closely B. Braun's competency framework into the coaching experience. So there was even more consistency between all of the other talent development experiences and approaches that were happening at B. Braun to be mirrored within the CoachHub digital platform experience. And there's just ongoing rollouts worldwide for all employees at all levels. And what is this looking like so far in terms of the results? Well, what we can see is that to date, when we've rolled out a particular cohort of individuals, there's 100% adoption rate. So people are completing all of their coaching engagements and assignments as we're being able to track in our platform. There's very high average scores for how coachees are experiencing that relationship between them and their coach. We call that the working alliance. There's strong trust, connection, and progression within that coaching experience. 89% of coaches are reporting that they're implementing new behaviors, new skills as a result of their coaching experiences. And we see very high satisfaction with the overall coaching program. Let's turn to our third topic. Claude's going to kind of set the stage for us in terms of what investing in leadership development for underrepresented groups can look like and how coaching can help us there.
Yeah, so as we all know, diversity and inclusion and equity has become a much bigger topic in most organizations over the last year and a half. And increasing the diversity of leadership is part of that. If we go to the next slide, our research is showing that about 2/3 of organizations believe it's important to develop a more diverse leader pipeline. Only about 1/3 believe they're effective in doing so. There are many reasons for this, including a real ambivalence that the research shows about creating targeted development programs for underrepresented groups, from women to minorities and people with disabilities. So I think organizations are struggling to understand what the best way to develop a more diverse leader pipeline is. So if we move to the next slide, we have a little bit more data on this. Here's a rundown of strategies that organizations use to improve diversity of the leadership pipeline. So coaching, as well as mentoring, has emerged as the most used strategy, and rightfully so, as we're seeing, but still less than half of organizations are doing this. So this is something that is beginning and developing, but still has a ways to go in terms of the evolution. About 1/3 of organizations, unfortunately, have no strategy in place at all for improving leadership pipeline diversity. But coaching can be very effective, and is probably the best way to scale inclusive leadership development. So we're going to talk now. Liz is going to give another story about how this can really work for diversity of leadership. Liz?
Yeah, awesome. And what I loved about in one of our earlier polls, I forget the exact percentage, but it looked like so many people are on our webinar today are already expanding their use of coaching relative to their D&I strategies. So that's really amazing, and would love to even learn from everybody on the call, because I think it's a newer way of thinking about that application. So here we have kind of the story of European Bank for Reconstruction and Development. And the EBRD has a Women in Leadership program that they run annually, and I think it's a couple cohorts a year. And what they were really looking for was wanting to, one of their strategic priorities is certainly developing a richer pipeline of female talent from earlier career, to really focus on an approach that's built from a strengths-based perspective, and to help really focus in on some of the foundational capabilities around self-efficacy, confidence, be able to focus on sort of resilience and some other sort of core capabilities from that standpoint. And so what we did was we, again, worked very closely with EBRD to align what the coaching experience could look like relative to their existing Women in Leadership program. And so what you can see here are just some of the highlights that we're starting to see from the beginning journey, from the beginning of their journey in what the experience of women is as they're going through this leadership development program, but specifically how they're experiencing coaching as a part of that program. So here, what you can see is that, 80% of the participants in this program are indicating that they're learning new competencies and capabilities. Their 74% are indicating that the coaching itself is really helping to achieve the goals that they are setting out to achieve as a part of that program and their coaching experiences. And one, I think, really important sort of story when we were talking with the sponsor for this program is that, what is the actual coachee experience that's happening? And so what you can see on the bottom here is just a little bit of an excerpt from a coachee story, that if it were not for the program, I would not have spoken up in my interview. This is about a promotion interview, about the things that I have done and have been clear about for my specific contribution, given the things that I've done and accomplished. And this particular individual, coming out of this Women in Leadership program and have gone through the coaching experience, in the next promotion cycle, which was 3 months post-program, was promoted. And this is part of her story that you see on the slide here. So it's a really powerful, I think, example of the space that's created in coaching itself to build the confidence that the ERBD was looking for as a part of this program, and part of the outcomes that they're hoping that women experience in developing their leadership skills and capabilities.
Okay, so we've gone through three stories, and I think Liz's done a great job of showing different ways coaching can be applied. I'm sure this raises some questions, so we're going to go over maybe one more slide, and then we've got time for questions if you want to ask us some questions. So what I wanted to kind of wrap up the formal part of the presentation is maybe some questions for you to consider before we handle your questions, kind of self-reflection questions. So we've talked about the use of digital coaching to develop leaders, and having a strong technology ecosystem is important to deliver personalized learning, not just coaching, but including coaching. So the question you need to ask yourself as you seek to move forward with a more contextualized and personalized approach to learning, including leadership development, is do you have what you need in technology, either through the use of your own internal systems or utilizing external platforms? And if not, how can you get there? So one of the things that organizations struggle to do sometimes is put together a technology strategy for human capital management and leadership development, learning, et cetera, and having it align with the business strategy. But it's really important to have all these different technology resources figured out, and not everything can be bought, and developed all at once. So having a strategy, understanding how one might build on another is really important to drive this more personalized, contextualized digital learning that is clearly going to be part of our future, because our research shows that digital learning increased significantly during the pandemic, and it's only probably going to get more. There will be some live learning, but the reliance on the classroom for delivering main programs like leadership development is dwindling. Live training will still exist, but it will be in a different form. And that's a different topic for a different day. But having a technology strategy and developing a technology ecosystem to drive your learning and leadership development initiatives is something you really need to think through. Next question is, do you feel you have a strong understanding of what your leaders need? We've shared what our research tells us. Are those things true in your organization? Or do you need to develop a deeper understanding of how your leaders and high potentials want to learn, how they do learn, and the skills and the competencies they need to really grow? Third, Do you have people within your organization who can offer high quality coaching of leaders and high potentials and are able or willing to make the time commitment to do so? This is what leaders are really struggling with. We just sent out a new leadership survey today, actually. And the number one modality for improving leadership development was coaching. And then I looked at how many are actually got an active program doing it, and it's the same thing as we showed you today. About half of the people who thought it was important are actually able to do it. And the reason for that is that they're relying a lot on internal coaching. And so there's a two-pronged problem there sometimes. One is, are those coaches really trained to coach leaders? And even if they are, do they have the time commitment? And do you have enough of them in order to scale your leader development the way you want to? So if that's an issue for you, and it sure seems to be in a lot of organizations, looking at a different way, doing external coaching with a digital coaching platform is something that you really, probably need to take a good look at. And last but not least, are you prepared to develop and support more peer-to-peer collaborative learning? This generation of leaders and high potentials really value this type of interaction and learning. They've grown up with connecting with peers and solving problems in groups through social learning, through a lot of their schooling. This is what they do. They work together, they collaborate. And so if you're not leveraging this type of learning, I think you're missing something that's very valuable, not only for the learning, but also for the relationships and the collaboration and the innovation that's going to be so important in this evolution of the workplace that we're going through. So you need to kind of figure out, I think, what are the next steps to get there. So let's see what questions we have coming in. Let me just scroll here for a minute. So this first question is fairly general, but maybe let's start with this, and it might be repeating a little bit of what we said, but Liz, this person's saying, I'm hearing a lot about the need to modernize leadership development, but what is really meant by that? And is coaching part of that?
Yeah, so it's a great question. So we touched on this a little bit, but really what we've been talking about, and Claude shared so much data around this, and we spoke to this, is that with the evolution of leadership, so how we look at leadership, what's required for, what we consider successful and effective leadership, the approach, given how we view leadership has changed, our approaches to leadership development haven't, and they have remained fairly stagnant. And so what does that really mean? In order to modernize leadership development, we need to simplify what we mean by leadership and the models that we've put in place. So leadership models over the years have become very complicated. The Neuro Leadership Institute has found that 44% of organizations had 21 or more behaviors in their leadership models. And that's not really, when we talked about earlier, the foundational skills of leadership, it kind of goes in contrast to what we have developed over the years. So when we say modernize leadership development, we need to start by simplifying how we're defining leadership in our organizations, the core capabilities that are required, and to figure out ways to really accelerate the development of those core capabilities in a personalized and democratized way.
To follow up on that, I think there's what we're finding in our research too, is that besides having too many, competencies, as Liz mentioned, and needing to simplify, there's not always real agreement in how leaders should be developed. And in the research we've conducted, there's also not only too many leadership competencies, but sometimes some competing models where some people in the organization thinks that certain leaders should be developed one way, and then others, whether it's difference in geography or business unit or level, believe they should be developed another way. So and that's, to me, and Liz, you can comment on that, that's really problematic, because leadership is not management, right? We're not talking about management skills here. We're talking about leadership. Leadership skills, at least in my opinion, are the same at all levels of leadership. The proficiency level and the dynamics of how you might exhibit those leadership behaviors may be different, but the principles are the same. So
I would 100% agree with you on that. And I think that that speaks to the point of you're thinking about leadership as the process of influencing and having an impact. That's not a formal position, right?
Right. So anyway, the simplification is the organizations really need to get a grasp on this, and I think there's a lot of competing thoughts on it.
For sure.
Okay, let's see here if there's anything else. Next one is coaching is powerful, but what do we know about its effectiveness, especially digital coaching? We touched a little bit on that, but let's elaborate a little bit.
Yeah, for sure. So digital coaching in and of itself, the research around digital coaching, so in sort of that technology-enabled solution, the research is in its infancy, really. There's some initial research from Barry and colleagues that showed the differences between face-to-face coaching and digital coaching. And what they found is that the problem resolution that coaches are focused on in both of those scenarios and the relationship that is developed between a coach and a coachee do not differ. They do not differ between those different modalities. And so that's providing us with some really foundational evidence as to the impact and effectiveness of digital coaching. We're seeing the same kinds of results as if it were to happen purely face-to-face. And a lot of the effectiveness and impact that we can draw on in how digital coaching can really be transformational comes from also a lot of research that exists around the virtual delivery of therapeutic modalities such as cognitive behavioral therapy. They share a similar type of process and working relationship with between two people, that also provides a ton of support for the effectiveness of digital coaching. And so we also there's a ton of literature out there and research that shows how coaching in and of itself, most of it has been done in a face-to-face format, this research, that it impacts individual outcomes such as increased self-efficacy, skill development. It impacts team dynamics and fosters better working relationships within teams. And coaching also has an impact at an organizational level. So there's a lot of evidence that does exist out there. It's now about translating that into continuing to translate that and extend the research when we look at it from a digital platform enablement perspective.
Great answer. Maybe looks like we have one more question. It's not kind of repetitive. And that is, as we look for more ways to transform approaches to learning, how do we get buy-in?
Well, I think you touched on this quite a bit, Claude, especially when you were speaking around how are these approaches to leadership development overall tied back to your talent strategy. And so that's one thing. I think that's the most important place to start, is really tying in your approaches to your strategic priorities and your talent priorities. Really leveraging what we do know from the research that exists, both academic and practice, and to leverage the data. There is a ton of data as to how individuals, teams, and organizations benefit from learning. There's some differences in terms of the figures that you'll find out there in hard ROI impact, but that's because learning and development interventions are highly individualized. But there is a lot of research out there, and I think if you start with the data and you connect your approach to your strategic objectives, you're going to be in a good place to get that buy-in.
And I think, yeah, and that's a great answer. But besides that, I think you also just need to look at the results that you're getting within your own organization.
Oh, sure.
People are not happy with learning. They're not happy with the results they're getting. So it's time to try something different. And a lot of the things we've talked about, the coaching, the peer-to-peer learning, the reinforcing scenario-based practices, through neuroscience, those types of things have been tested time and time again. But to be fair, I haven't, in recent months and years, haven't seen a lot of organizations that actually will disagree that these new forms of learning aren't better. The question is just kind of changing the paradigm within the organization, changing how the learning organization approaches learning, educating everybody on the new ways, and also having the resources to do it. So I don't think it's as much about, and that's why I asked those rhetorical questions at the end. It's not so much that people need to be convinced at this point that one size fits all learning is effective. It's how can we transform ourselves as quickly as we can to do this new type of learning and do it effectively.
I think it's a really great point. And I think along with that, I liked the words that you used, the paradigm shift. I think there's also a paradigm shift that needs to go along with, when we're implementing a new approach to learning in particular, and we ask that question, is it effective? We're very quick to dismiss, the core measurements that go along with that from an individual perspective. Oh, well, it's self-reported measures. Well, what we're talking about here is an individual's learning, an individual's experience. And that is some of the most valuable data that you'll ever get. So I think along with the paradigm shift and it's time to try something new, people are asking for it. We also know that there are certain approaches that work better than others. We also need a paradigm shift around what we're asking and the data we're looking for when we say, well, is it effective and is it working? We should be more confident and reliant on that individual's experience. And not look to overcomplicate how we're measuring the effectiveness and impact.
I agree. Well, I think we've hit the top questions that have, not kind of repetitive of one another. So we've got about 3 minutes left. We'll give you a little bit of time back and allow you to move on to your next meeting. I want to thank Liz and CoachHub for sponsoring and being such great advocates for coaching and sharing so much great information. Thank you especially for taking the time out of your busy days to spend time with us. We hope it's been helpful. We will be sharing the deck with you, and we look forward to seeing you all on another webinar shortly. Thank you, everybody, and have a great rest of the day.